Welcome to the Daily MBA, where business wisdom is served fresh and fast, straight from one of the top MBA programs in the world. I'll give you summaries of my lectures and readings, as well as the most important insights gained from an MBA, so you can apply all of this knowledge in every business. Let's get started. In today's episode, I'm going to start talking about managerial economics. But don't get scared if you listen to that, because economics is basically common sense that sounds difficult. But all of this, you will see it's actually pretty simple because it's what you're living in your day-to-day life, and all of the decisions that you're taking when buying things or when selling them are going to be explained by the basic models in economics. So, since this is my first episode about economics, I want to start with the most simple things, and they are going to be demand, supply, and equilibrium. So first of all, let's start with demand. Demand is basically saying who wants any product, who wants any service, who is demanding whatever it is that someone else is selling. And for understanding how demand works, let's think of a simple example. Let's say I'm selling coffee and I want to make a lot of profit, so I start selling a cup of coffee for $20. I assume that nobody will want to buy a cup of coffee for $20. Maybe someone that's about to fall asleep and has a final might be willing to buy it for, let's say, $17. So I will get my first customer at $17. But I'm still not making a lot of profit, so I should put the price a little bit down so more people want to buy it. Let's say I now start selling it at $10. It will still be an expensive coffee, but I'll start attracting more and more people because they're going to be willing to pay that amount for a cup of coffee. If we continue pulling it down and down the price, you'll see that more and more people want the coffee, until, for example, if the price reaches $0, I would get tons of people taking that coffee. Even those who probably didn't want to pay for it will take it now that it's free. And so this simple logic explains basically what's called the reservation price, which is the maximum price that you are willing to pay for any type of service or product. So if you have lower reservation prices, it will be hard for you because you only are willing to pay a little bit for a product that may be high. But if, on the contrary, you were the person that was going to buy my coffee at $17, you had a willingness to buy that was very big. And when I gave my coffee cheaper, you were actually feeling good because you were getting a good deal. So prices are going to be very relative to the people, but because companies can't satisfy everybody's needs and wants, they're going to have to move along this that's called the demand curve. So why is it called a demand curve? We're going to imagine a graph where the axes are going to be price that's going up in the y-axis, and then quantity that's going horizontally in the x-axis. So if you have a high price, let's imagine is the highest, for me it was 20, I'll have 0 quantity sold. But now, if I start moving my quantity a little bit, I want to sell to one person, the $17 person, I'm going to lower my price, and that will make a shift in the quantity. If I start moving along this curve, I'll find that it's a downward sloping curve. So it looks like a diagonal line, but it's going down, because this will reflect what's happening to the demand. You'll get more people if there's a lower price, and you'll get less people if there's a higher price. So that's why this curve is in this way. Now, when we're thinking about this curve, you could move either along the curve, and this would be called a change in the quantity demanded, because you're just moving the quantity, or you could also have a change in demand. And this one will shift the whole curve to move either upwards or downwards, or how economics likes to say it, It will expand the curve or detract the curve. And so what things might make that curve move entirely? The first factor for a demand shift might be a change in income. And this will start creating differences between the goods, but we're going to imagine that all of the goods there are two types of goods: normal goods or inferior goods. So the normal goods are going to be the ones that when people have more income, they'll buy more. So let's say housing. Housing is a normal good because if you have more money, you'll buy more houses. Good clothes are also a normal good because if you have more money, you'll also buy more expensive clothes. But, for example, you may also find an inferior good, which is a good whose demand actually drops when the income rises. So this one is not as intuitive. But let's say, for example, that you may find instant noodles. These are going to be something that's very cheap. So somebody that has more money won't be interested in getting more instant noodles when they get more money. They'll stop buying instant noodles and then they'll get something more elaborate. Or they'll go out to a restaurant. So you'll be divided between these two types of goods. Normal goods, in which you'll buy more when you get more money, or inferior goods, when you buy less if you have more money. And so why is this important? Because if we have a change in income, let's say you get a promotion and you start earning a lot more, the entire demand curve for the inferior goods will go down because now you won't want those inferior goods. But now the entire demand for the normal goods will move up because you'll want more of those since you have more income. A second demand shifter may be the population. And this one is a bit more intuitive because more population will lead to a price increase. And if you have a price increase and more population, this will shift the entire curve up because quantity is not really increasing. It's just the price that's increasing. The third demand shifter may be the consumer preferences. And this one is more ambiguous, but basically it's about quality, prestige, how cool something may be. So this one's more personal, but the consumer preferences will definitely lead to a change in demand. Finally, the fourth type, which is a little bit more complex, is the prices and availability of the related goods. And there are two types of related goods. You first may find the complements. And so what are complements? These are goods that you usually consume together. So let's think, for example, peanut butter and jelly. If the price of peanut butter rises, then the demand for jelly decreases. Why is that? Because now you don't want peanut butter. Peanut butter is being too expensive. And since you already buy those two together, then you also won't buy from the jelly. And this is basically out of your control because the other good had the rising in the price, but still you took a decision for both of those. So if the price of peanut butter goes up, you'll buy less jelly because you're buying less peanut butter as well. But let's say, for example, the price of peanut butter goes down. Then you'll buy more jelly, even if it's selling at the same price, just because you're buying more peanut butter. So those would be the perfect example of complements. And there is a second type of related goods, and this one's going to be called the substitutes. And substitutes are going to behave differently because they're going to be, for example, Coke and Pepsi. So if the price of one goes up, let's imagine the price for Pepsi goes up. Now it's more expensive. Now you don't want Pepsi. So the demand for Coke will go up. So if price goes up on one, the demand will go up on the other one. This is completely different from the complements that we saw. Because if price of peanut butter rose, the demand fell on the other. Here they're moving in the same direction of the substitutes. So the prices of Pepsi changing would be a change in the quantity demanded because you're moving along the same curve, but this will create an entire shift of the curve for Coke. And so this substitutes may be the obvious ones, so Coke and Pepsi, but you could also think about it, for example, in downtown housing and gas prices. Because if now gasoline is more expensive, you probably don't want to be driving around. And so you don't want to live very far away. You want to live in downtown. These are going to be a bit more complicated things, let's say commuting. But for now, you can imagine the simple examples. So peanut butter jelly are complements. Substitutes are going to be Pepsi and Coke. And so now we understand demand, but let's go to the other side, the supply. So supply is going to be not what you want to buy, but it's going to be kind of the opposite. It's how you want to sell it. And so I was saying initially that if I was selling coffee for a high price, I would get a lot of earnings. So if you get to a market where there is a good that's sold very expensive, you will have lots of people wanting to sell it because many people want to create more money. So sellers, sellers, sellers. As soon as the price starts going down a little bit, then maybe not everyone wants to sell because it's not going to be as good. So the quantity of sellers will be reduced. They're not going to start producing as much because that is going to give them a lower price. And let's say the price keeps falling and keeps falling until it's zero. Basically, as a producer, why would you create something and sell something if you're getting zero in return? So that will also give to zero supply. You're not going to supply anyone from this product because you're not going to be earning anything. And as you can see, this one's more correlated. If there is a lower price, there will be a lower amount of sellers. If there's a high price and it's very attractive, you will have a lot of sellers. So because here, price and quantity are correlated, this one's the supply curve, basically it's going to be also a diagonal line, but it's going to be rising. So as quantity rises, price also rises. You have a higher price, you want to sell more quantity. You have a lower price, you want to sell less quantity. And similar to demand, we can also have shifts in the supply curve. And those shifts can be either within the curve, moving along the curve, and this would be called the changes in quantity supplied, or you might have the shifts of the entire move. This would be the shifts in supply. And there are going to be 4 supply shifters. The first one is the industry size, which is going to be related to the number of players. So if you have more players, this is going to shift the curve to the right because you're increasing the quantity. There are more people in this market, so the entire curve will shift. This will also happen if you have more technology because more technology will give you the capacity to produce more, maybe for the same price. So you're willing to give even more, even for the same price. So changes in technology will make a shift in the supply. A third supply shifter will be the input prices. Because if you can produce more cheaply from your inputs, so let's say, for example, I'm selling cookies and flour and sugar are cheaper, the changes in this input prices will make me shift my curve, will want to make me supply even more. And it would be the opposite. If they become more expensive, then I won't want to sell as much. So all of these ones will depend on the input supply. And the fourth factor will be, and this is a bit harder to understand, the output prices of the related markets. So if we are talking about related markets, this is going to bring back the concept of substitutes, but these ones are going to be the substitutes in supplies. So it's not going to be the consumers, the ones that are switching between products like Coke and Pepsi, but they are going to be the producers. because one thing might bring them more benefit than selling in their current market. So let's say I own an apartment and I have people renting it, but I'm seeing the Airbnb market rising and I want to make more profits. So this is the output price of a related market. I'm thinking which would be better. Is the opportunity cost worth it? Should I change to the other market? These are going to be the questions that suppliers may have, and this might switch the entire curve, and it would be an entire shift in the supply. Finally, there's also another shift in the supply curve, and this one's usually going to be taxes. Because if you get taxes and you're the supplier, you may get a high responsiveness. And maybe the company can't pass on those costs. So as you're going to have to assume those costs, you're going to shift, but this is not a right shift, but a left shift. You are detracting, let's say, the supply curve and making it a bit smaller because you don't want to sell as much or you can't afford to do it just because you have to pay taxes. So those are the 5 supply shifters. Now that we know all of the things related to the supply curve and the demand curve, we can finally talk about equilibrium. So, what is the market equilibrium, or how others call it competitive equilibrium? It's basically going to be the price in which you get the same quantity from supply and the same quantity from demand. So all the sellers that are going to be willing to sell at that price are going to equal all of the buyers that are going to be willing to buy at that price. And that's why it's called an equilibrium, because you're putting together supply and demand, and they're both going to be found in the same price. If you, for example, had a higher quantity supplied and a lower demanded, this would be called a surplus. Too much is being produced and nobody's buying it. But since this is not very efficient, quantity will start shifting until it gets to the equilibrium. On the other hand, let's say the quantity demanded is higher than the one supplied. People want more than what's being produced. Then, this will lead the price to go up, and more sellers are going to believe this is attractive. I could sell in this market and I could make money out of it. So they're going to start producing more until quantities match. This one, second option, was called a shortage because you're not receiving as much as you'd like, whereas in the surplus, producers were doing too much that they had to stop producing and they had to put their price down. So either of those 2 possibilities, a surplus where the quantity supplied is higher or a shortage where the quantity demanded is higher, are not going to be optimal for either of the parts. And this ones will lead to always the market equilibrium, because this is the price where it will stop moving. Suppliers are happy and the demandants or the people that are buying are also happy. In my next episodes, I'll start talking about price elasticity, which is going to be an important factor when analyzing all of these curves in demand and supply. So I'll see you next time.